All right, all right. Well, there it is. We are early today, which is a doozy. It is Wednesday, April 12th. I don't know what happened to the first quarter of the year, but it's over. Taxes, personal taxes are due next Tuesday, I believe. Um, Things are moving really fast. There's lots going on in the world. We'll go around the horn here in a moment. We have a great guest, but before we get started, I'm going to ask our own John Sibley Butler to play some music.
It would be a comfort just to know you never doubt me. Although I give you calls most every day.
Woo! Very nice, Johnny. You're branching out into some new tunes. I like that.
I am. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, good. What's going on? What's going on in the world, John Sibley Butler?
Well, what's going on in the world? Let me start with Texas, first of all, and the bills before the House, the Texas House, to devalue, if you will, natural energy going forward, take it off the table. So that I think that's very, very interesting. It's always interesting when the legislators, right, are in town. And the other thing that's really, really interesting is, I mean, the job market appears to be doing good, and we're talking about inflation and a some kind of recession. So when you look at those correlations and that statistic is kind of mind-boggling. We create lots of jobs, but still we're talking about the economy of the money economy of the stock market. Other than that, if you look at, I saw an article in the paper today talking about distributive work, where a young lady quit her job. She was making over six figures because they ordered her back to the office.
Really?
I thought that was very, very significant in lots of ways because I had heard that before. And the other thing is the tragic has become normal. Whether you're talking about the war in Europe, whether you're talking about all the immigration stuff that was going on here in Texas and New York. But for the most part, as we sit here, the Texas created 4 or 5 times the amount of jobs in the other state in the country. And there's a lot of stuff that's swirling around that. So it's very, very interesting. But what happens, Llewellyn, when tragedy becomes normal, whether it's a shooting in Knoxville, what happens when tragedy becomes normal? What happens? And I'm a Vietnam veteran.
Well, unfortunately, you answered it in the way you phrased the question. You answered the question, normal. I don't believe they were totally adjusted to random shootings. I did something that I've not done in a long time. I wrote an article for syndication, and I got into about 50 newspapers, suggesting we should look again at prohibiting the private ownership of assault weapons, not guns, assault weapons. Now, every time I write something like that, I get a mailbox full of hate mail, saying that I'm a communist, a follower of the devil, that I abuse children, every nasty thing you can dream of saying that Johnny hasn't already said. But this time, not one hate letter, a lot of letters of approval and no hate mail. And I said to Linda, my wife, because I said, prepare for the hate mail. It didn't come. This suggests that people are thinking about this issue. I also think that there are other changes. I think there are seismic shifts taking place both in our politics domestically and globally. I think we're at the end of a particularly rankest period in our politics, largely because nature will force on us a change of leadership. All of our leaders at the moment are quite old men. Not as old as I am, but they're quite old. And that means we're going to have a younger. I'm hoping that Biden will not run again. I'm hoping that that Trump will fade and that new faces will appear. There's nothing so good for getting you out of the doldrums as a fresh wind. And I think we're ready for a fresh wind, for, if I can mix my metaphor, for a Lochinvar to ride in from from anywhere, and to change our politics and get us back to the kind of civility that was part of our discourse, really, until the arrival of Newt Gingrich in 1994. I was covering Congress fairly intently at that time, and I know Newt Gingrich very well indeed. But I was amazed at what has happened and how we can't do anything but to sling mud at each other and accuse each side of lying. And by the way, each side probably is lying. But there you go. Then internationally, there are seismic shifts. China is not going to go away. China is a major player. We're going to have to, see what we're going to do about Taiwan. Do we want to go into a world war with China to defend Taiwan, as we promised to do? There are, I think, about 30 million people, 29, something like that, in Taiwan. Are we going to plunge the world? And what is our strategic interest in Taiwan? I think it would be tragic. I think it is terrible to see a democracy subsumed by a communist country with a dictator president, but the price is very high. We also need to come to an accommodation with the Chinese so that we don't keep edging towards some kind of conflagration. All the build-ups they have for a new Cold War, maybe for a hot war, we need to change that trajectory. And I think that Emmanuel Macron, the French leader, has gone to China. He's getting a lot of criticism for it, but I think he's trying to change that trajectory. Then we have our unstable and unattractive friends in Saudi Arabia who have raised the price of oil. They are the large swing producer. The lifting cost for oil in Saudi Arabia is very, very low. When I last looked at lifting costs, it was low in China, in Russia, and it's still low in Saudi. We had Biden go and talk there. We had George W. Bush win. The Saudis play us for idiots. Now they're making nice with the Iranians. There are shifts going on, and we can't go on with the old rhetoric and the old solutions to change challenges. So that's the world today, changing.
Yeah. Johnny, anything else?
Well, I think so, but I think the world has always changed. I think what makes it so different now is that we can see the immediate response. As Andrew could tell you, the data flow like water. Models are created like model. There's hardly no lag in what happens. And when there's no lag, when humans perceive stuff, then it appears that two things happen. You have the reality that's not lagging at all. So reality is forced upon us. We don't really have time to think about how things have always been. As we say, the more things change, the more they remain the same. So the big difference is the revolution in digital technology, how we perceive things. Everybody has an opinion, whether it's Twitter or whatever it is. So as we move forward, we just have to learn to understand and work with, if you will, the changing nature of communications. And the biggest change, whether starting a war on Twitter, or bringing in significant kinds of visions about war all over the world, then we have to put that kind of change aside, right beside what we do to make a living and to keep the country going.
Yeah. So what's exciting to me in many ways is I'm sitting here attending a regional mobility conference and put together by the Austin Greater Chamber of Commerce, which is really more of a 5 counties collaborating on transportation for the future, and talking about how to spend or how to invest $25 billion in the next 2 years. And what is exciting is, we're always focused on the human interaction of what's going on, but I find something really interesting evolving with what I call connected infrastructure. And the fact that you can sensorize everything and start collecting data in a different way, and maybe now have machines talking to machines to make life easier for humans without humans being involved in the process, is to me sort of what's happening. And we don't see it, we don't talk about it, but I think we do talk about it in this program in terms of the digitalization, decentralization, decarbonization of industry. And so with that said, Andrew Mitchell from Tantalus is in the middle of how, a significant portion of the infrastructure that runs this country is getting digitized, data is flowing. There is all kinds of new things that he's working on. So anyway, I'm going to give him a chance to say hello and get involved in this conversation. Yep. Andrew, hi, how are you?
Good, guys. How are you? It's great to be a part of the show. If I could just dovetail on what Llewellyn was talking about a minute ago with the issues in Saudi Arabia and parlay that back into our electric grid. It's quite interesting. Walmart is coming out with charging stations at all their stores over the next 2 years, is what they announced today in the news. And so while we say that, and it's great toward the decarbonization, if you flip back to the gas and oil prices and you look what's happening to our economy, there was also a note this morning that the industry is going to be flooded with an oversupply of vehicles, which are going to cause the prices to dip dramatically. And so now you've got that separation again of, well, if I can afford a gasoline engine car versus an electric car, there's such a huge divide. We're not on the same page. And as we travel around the country at Tantalus, we see this in small communities, large communities, and the big cities on how our electric grid is unprepared for the shift going both directions. We're very fragile.
So. Well, I couldn't agree more about the electric grid, and we don't know. Most people think, I read often that I think there are several really reputable studies that suggest that the transportation fleet of private cars will be 50% or 40% electric by 2030. Today, I read that 4 out of 10 new car sales will be electric. Now, that may well be modified by what Andrew says, but the grid is not ready. The electric industry, there is no switch they can throw to make themselves ready. I'm working on an article for the New York Times. I'm not sure if it'll be published, but at least I'm working on it, trying to point out the difficulties at the grid edge, that simply the demands being put on the system cannot, as it's now constructed, meet. You're going to have take, for example, what they call clusters of charging. If you get an affluent subdivision, the kind that Johnny lives in, where there are a lot of idealistic people, not Johnny, when you get that kind of situation, they will all buy electric cars. They will swamp their own power supply. If they all go home at 5 o'clock, and they tend to be people who do that, and start charging up at 5 o'clock when the grid is at its most vulnerable, because everybody's turning everything on, air conditioning, dishwashers, the lot, cooking dinner. The grid cannot support it. Local grids cannot support it. They'll need much better power transfer with better conductors, and they won't be installed between now and 2030. The largest piece of hope on the horizon for the electric survivability, and therefore for us to get by without blackouts and brownouts and other interruptions, is distributed energy resources. And these are coming on very strongly, and they're interesting because it is the one place where environmentalists and the electric utility are of a single mind. It depends largely on curtailing demand and somewhat on new generation, like hooking up. And then it's not certain how this is going to be done, but hooking up rooftop solar. Do you want everybody to have a power wall and possibly therefore a chance of fire in their homes or garages? Or as Nevada Electric, NV is doing, putting it new batteries, big batteries up to 50 megawatts in substations, so that the rooftop solar goes directly to the substation. The inverter is there. You don't need the inverter at the point of supply as you do at the moment. This is all very much in flux. It's very exciting, it's very interesting, and at one level, it's scary.
It is,
So-
Llewellyn.
so-
We've taken a little different approach.
Hold on, Andrew. Andrew, give me a moment. Give me a moment before you jump in. I want you to answer all this, but for the audience sake, I want to introduce you formally. Give me 2 seconds.
Yep.
Andrew Mitchell is the Director of Utility Solutions at Tantalus Systems Holdings, Inc. He's going to be with us for the hour. Tantalus System is a leading substation automation, distribution automation, advanced metering infrastructure, and distributed energy resource management company offering communications, edge computing, and analytic solutions to electric, water, and gas utilities. Prior to Tantalus, Andrew was an engineering supervisor at Northeastern REMC and an integration engineer at Advanced Control Systems. He holds an MBA in management from Indiana Institute of Technology and a BS in electrical engineering technology from Purdue University. So Andrew, welcome to the program. I know that you're dying to jump in, because what I was gonna say to Llewellyn real quick before introducing you was that while the challenge is tremendous, there are companies working on it, and you are one of those companies. So tell us how you solve all this and how it all gets orchestrated.
Thanks, Andreas. Appreciate the nice introduction there. And Llewellyn, you're right. We're really not ready at a grid level without first step of digitization of the grid, and we have to know what's going on. It's kind of like the old days of going from analog to digital and getting ourselves ready from the old rotary telephone to having caller ID on our cell phones. We have to know what's going on. And so at Tantalus, that's been the first step is we serve the public power and cooperative world intimately with almost 300 customers in that space. And you're absolutely right. There's all these transformers and poles and wires and connections out there that are not ready for the electric vehicles and the solar and the whatnot. And so that's where Tantalus has stepped in and said, okay, why not, as you said, put it at the edge of the grid and have a device out there that can monitor and see when these devices are coming online, and then be able to shut them off or not allow the transformer to overheat or to cycle through that affluent neighborhood that Johnny's living in that has all those EVs that his neighbors are buying, and that transformer is not large enough to serve it. But we have a solution now that allows all of his neighbors to plug in, and then we can rotate through the charging to keep that asset there on the ground and extend its lifespan until we figure out how to get the vehicle to grid, how we get those energy resources back up to the substation level without destroying the equipment that's already on site. So that's the play we're taking at Tantalus.
So go deeper on that, Andrew. Help the audience understand, what are we talking about? What are these products called? What is the technology behind them? Just kind of go through the whole rainbow of things.
So let's start with the EV itself. If you think of the new F-150 Lightning that's coming out, it's got a very large battery in it. And to help people that aren't in the industry, that's like having 6 air conditioners at your house. So if you have 1 or 2 air conditioners and your electric bill is $300 or $400 or whatever it may be, think of adding 6 air conditioners with that new pickup truck. And I'm sure all the other vendors that come out will have similar sizes at some point. So now what happens is, if you have that transformer that's in your backyard or hanging on the pole, if you plug that in and don't call your utility and don't say anything, within a matter of days, weeks, hours, that transformer will melt, it will blow up, it will burn down, and it will cause all kinds of problems and drive the cost up of electricity. So what Tantalus does is we come out with a meter, a smart meter that goes at the location, and it has firmware in it that can monitor that. We call that our True Edge device, and we have firmware that allows us to be able to see that in real time. And so from a utility perspective, we have over 3 million of these endpoints deployed throughout the United States, Caribbean Basin, and Canada that now allows us to be able to see when this pickup truck comes on, and the utilities can go out and offer these customers special pricing so that they can charge whether it be the middle of the night, and they don't even know it. It's all handled automatically through software. We call that, our load management software, and we're able to do that just by digitizing the electric meter that's out there.
This is interesting. So let us say that, I think of it like this: the interstate highway are the big wires,
Yep.
big wires, right? And then they go off to the distribution. Then you got the grid edge, right? And it seemed to me that there's lots of electricity being, as we've talked about on the show, being produced, but it's got to get back on the grid. You got to get back on there. Does your loading mechanism allow the re-entry of electricity?
It does.
So
we bought a company.
Yeah. Okay.
We bought a company a year ago called Congruitive, and with the Congruitive software, what that allows us to do is it allows us to manage where that software is at and where it can go based on the utility's ability to either push it back to battery storage at a substation, or to push it back to a transmission interconnect, or to distribute that across the feeder to other customers that are on the grid, so that you can know, let's say for talking purposes, that storm in Texas a couple years back, Uri, if one of the utilities out there had batteries and you had customers that had local batteries or solars or vehicle to grid, our software, Congruitive software with our metering, we could have seen each and every house that had available distributed energy resources, and we could have fed maybe an entire feeder, or we could move that electricity all the way through the feeder into the substation and back down another feeder to a customer that was a special needs customer, or a medical customer that needed it in an emergency. And so we now have the ability to see where it's all at. Part of the problem is throughout the day and throughout the night, there's grid congestion, and we have to do a better job of understanding where we can put electricity, where we can take electricity from, and then how we can distribute it in a fair and equitable manner. Every state, every city, every muni, every co-op has different rates and rules across the United States that some forbid it, some allow it, some don't. And then again, you're going behind the meter to pull electricity. The analogy that some people use is, if I had Llewellyn had a Mercedes vehicle with a full tank of gasoline in it, or diesel, and he parks it in his garage, if the utility signed him up for it and I needed that diesel fuel, would he allow me to use it to power something else? But in the turn, I have to be able to fill that diesel fuel back up in that Mercedes before he comes out to go to his first location in the morning time. And so that's the idea with the electricity. We can't leave customers with empty solar or empty battery walls and empty vehicles, at the most inopportune time. So that's where the utilities are struggling.
So Andrew, you're telling me then, in the summation, the sum of all the electricity, then it's not the fact that we cannot meet the future needs, it's how we manage the electricity that we have. Is that what I hear you saying? That is, what I hear you saying is that
we can meet most of the needs if the legislature doesn't shut us down in certain strokes of the pen, if you will. As I travel across the country, I'm all over the United States. There's different areas that are legislating certain types of fossil fuel generation that to be shut off, and they don't have enough battery storage in place yet. And there's going to be brownouts 2025, 2026, because there's not enough generation and not enough battery storage to spin it around in certain areas. Why that's being allowed to happen, that has to go up the food chain to our legislators and decide that. But from a generation and supply, we've got enough to spin it around and do different things and move it across the country and do all kinds of things with it. But there are so many strings attached to it. It's pretty amazing.
Andrew, it seems to me that you've outlined a very interesting and challenging world, but also a very precarious one. That all of these bits have to work in this giant real-time jigsaw, and this is asking a lot of any system. Also, I was wondering about the electric vehicles. Don't you have to inventory them so you know where they are? I heard of a company last week when I was in Texas, actually, that is able to inventory electric vehicles so that you know where the population is and what its moving habits are. I mean, if you have, for example, if you depend the now almost mythical F-100, I only actually know one person who has one and is using it, the Lightning, and he tells me that it's a big disappointment on long distance towing. It just doesn't reach its spec. So, but anyway, besides the point, is if you rely on electric vehicles feeding X amount into the grid, along comes a big weekend when everybody goes out of town, that resource is not there. You really got to know an awful lot. When you go to a mobile generating backup system, you're going to have to know a lot about that mobility and whether the resource you think you have will be available and dispatchable when you need it.
You're right, Llewellyn. And so historically, from an electric utility perspective, we've always stopped at the meter, at the edge of the home, the edge of the premise, and we've never wanted to go further when I was at the utility for the last 100 years because of liability, lawsuit, right? And so now you're absolutely right. We have to go behind the meter and understand. And so at Tantalus, we've developed this new device called a TrueSense Fiber Gateway that sits behind any meter, any flavor. It doesn't matter if it's a Tantalus meter or whatnot, but it reaches into the home. It's got a Wi-Fi on it. It's got home plug on it. And so, as you said, how often do you call the electric utility and say, hey, I'm adding on to my house, or I'm adding this bit of load, or I'm adding this? And most of the time, people do not call the electric utility. So it's up to us to figure out what's going on behind that meter. So there's two approaches. One, if the utility talks to the customer and puts out programs and is proactive, we can take this new device of ours and have the utility go out and offer new rates to talk directly to any IP addressable in-home device. So that EV charger, that DER, or whatever the case may be, now the utility can see that, offer a special rate, and can see it in real time and bring it into their control room and compare it to what's going on at the substation. The second approach is, go ahead.
I just want to follow up one question before I don't want to take too much other people's time. But you've laid out a scenario in which the situation is manageable. But your own company has a white paper which says the demand for electricity is going to double by 2050. There's nothing you've said that is convincing that we can meet that simply by managing unlimited supply.
Well, I think it's behavior driven, right? And so as we continue as a society, we're very wasteful. So, matter of fact, when I was at the conference at CMG in Austin last year, Texas was California was 2 minutes away from rolling blackouts. Mm-hmm. And the governor put the text out and they dropped 2 gigawatts of electricity in a matter of seconds. So part of it is our lifestyle and that we're a bit wasteful in this country and we don't optimize things and we're not efficient at certain things. So yes, if we scale in the trajectory that we're currently going with the way people behave, then we will outpace what has been legislated out, not what's available to be made, but what's been legislated out of production and supply. Therefore, we have to manage what's available, whether it be through renewable resources or the different natural gas or the different things that are available to us. Again, it becomes a bit of a game in the scenario of when do you do things versus when you don't, because in the morning time in certain parts of the country, we have excess energy in abundance. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes later in the day, when people come home across the East and West Coast between 4 and 7 o'clock at night, we're peaking and there's a little bit of a strain on the grid. Well, if we take all this information we have from all these different resources and shift them around, we can now balance that line out from early morning to late afternoon using different avenues and different technologies.
Mhm.
So Andrew, let me talk about a business model I mentioned before. I want to do my own power plant. I want to lay my own lines in my community. We all get together, just like you get together to build a golf course in the community. And given the new technology, what I want to do is build something that's independent of the big machine, the biggest machine in the world. I want this thing to be for my community. I want it to be the energy to come from combustion engine energy or whatever have you. Are we there yet where Americans can get together, build their own, given the technology, create their own power plant in their own communities and manage it themselves and be independent of all the wires that we have nationally and indeed internationally? Is that a business model?
I mean, it's something that can be done with microgrids that we're doing across the country. Again, it comes to legislation. We have to be able, as long as that stays disconnected from the big machine, if you will, and doesn't pose a safety risk to those people protecting the public and protecting the workers, there's companies doing that now. And we can even do that with our congruitive software where we island you and you can stay completely separate with your own battery, your own solar, your own substation, and run it just the way you want in your own community. And we have a couple of those that do that. When their system goes down, we have an interconnect that allows our software to kick in and bring them online so that they can have power in that type of scenario in a safe mechanism. It boils down to legislation in the different counties. Where I worked and where I was at, counties legislated out who couldn't have solar based on where you live in the United States. So if all things are equal and whatnot, if your area allows you to do that, by all means, we have enough stuff available to us in this country to do that.
So the technology will allow to isolate, to build my own plant, battery, whatever have you, and be independent of the grid, the massive grid.
Yeah.
Who is lobbying for what is needed? Is it the Rural Electric Cooperative Association? Is it the American Public Power? Or is it the Edison Electric Institute? Or are they doing it in some kind of collusion?
You have multiple entities out there, and you named in our target market, the APPA and the NRECA co-op. They are out there advocating on behalf of rural America and smaller cities, advocating for what they believe is the correct solution for their constituents. That being said, that's a completely different group of people than those that are living in the city of Austin or Las Vegas or Tampa, Florida, with multiple millions of customers. So that in my 17 years at my former employer, it was part of the Touchstone Co-op. There were certainly competing interests that make this game a very dicey game when it comes to legislation and what's available on the grid.
Okay, so Andrew, I'm sorry.
I just wanted, Johnny, you mentioned microgrids, Andrew. I can't find utilities that are enthusiastic about them. And I can find an awful lot of environmentalists that are jumping up and down, orgasmically excited about them.
Well, it kills our business model, Llewellyn. From the co-op world and the APPA world, it's a 30-year business model. So everything is bought and shared and spread out over 30 years. And if you lose, a fifth of your community or a sixth of your community, you've lost your ability to pay for those assets and to keep prices down as those folks go off grid and buy clean power and walk away from the entity that is there. It's interesting. We had a lot of that in rural America with the Amish community. If they take loans on a home or a piece of land, the law says they have to let us run electricity until they pay the loan off. And so then they go and they rip it all out as soon as the loan's paid. They have all solar and we're no longer connected. So it can be done. It's just that changes your rate base, that changes your business model. Our Caribbean basin customers, with the advent of solar and the cost coming down, their peak has now changed to the middle of the night. And so it's a completely different dynamic for our Caribbean customers, to where they're having to run their peakers and things in the nighttime when solar and there's not enough battery storage. So certainly changes your business model.
So what I hear now, even now, Andrew, right now in America, there are different models like the Amish that we really don't talk about. Okay, and given their religious preference for the non-utilization of electricity and technology, then we have a model already that communities can exist once they rip it out, and they exist completely on solar. So my question to you is, how in terms of being updated on the new technology, and let's look at the decision makers, the elected officials, how present are they in their knowledge and know-how of what's really happening on the grid? Do we have to have a special training program for them, city councilmen, mayors, elected officials, and et cetera? When you interact with them, as Llewellyn would say, not many excited about a lot of this. How do you perceive their knowledge and know-how right now?
For lack of a better word, limited.
Okay.
So think of it this way. Our country's broken down into so many different regions of independent system operators. We have different regions. We'll just call it 4 quadrants. Well, the Southeast is power rich, right? Down Georgia Power way and nuclear power and things of that nature. And so they don't have a lot of demand charges down there. So they can run power and draw economic development to that part of the country. And they just keep taking and keep growing and growing and growing. And right now, the demand charges are much, much less there than they are in the Rust Belt or the Midwest. And so as they take excessive, and well, maybe not excessive, but they take large profits and they continue to grow, where is the impotence to reinvest in the electric grid? From that level, there's not. They're just raking the profit off of the electric, and they're not forced to reinvest back into the grid until it gets to the point where it breaks. You go to other parts of the country and they're so constrained, like out west with Lake Mead going down and the 7 States Dam and things of that nature out west, and the growth, they're power constrained, and they're looking at all different kinds of models, and they're looking to grow technology much faster than other folks. And so with it being so different all across the country, our elected officials don't have an understanding. This is not taught in school. This isn't taught anywhere. It's why would I, if I'm in charge and I have to go to the mayor and say, I need $3 million to rebuild 3 miles of line, the mayor's going to look at me and say, well, I need $3 million for the water plant or the city council or the whatnot. How does he know which one is more important? And right now, a lot of them say, well, the grid's been going for 100 years, just keep it going.
Yeah, and of course, there's no competition. That's the big thing. There's no, we don't have a competitive nature of the grid such that we cannot destroy it by another. We have to operate on it, if you will, at 80,000 feet, 40,000 feet. Yes, I think so. So given that scenario, and there's no competition, then do you predict that we will do the piecemeal that we've been doing for the last 100 years?
Until something dramatically changes, unfortunately. I've been in the industry, I guess this is my 25th, 26th year. There's so many different competitors out there and so many different folks out there. Everybody runs it different. Everybody has a different agenda. Unfortunately, it's going to be a piecemeal for a long time until, in my opinion, there's a catastrophic event that takes place in this country on the grid. And then, there's a lot of talk of cybersecurity. I get it, but some of our systems are so old and so different that they can't even get into it via cybersecurity because they don't have anything cyber connected to it. That's how old some of these systems are. So, I thought the 2008 blackout would have really led us down the path, of doing more standardization across the grid, but it just hasn't. It's too fractured.
So short of wireless electricity by Tesla, will be no competition. And
well, I think there's going to be competition, but it's going to come from the most unexpected places right now. I think what you're going to see is if you look outside the box, you've got all these electric vehicle people. You got Fords, you got Teslas, you got the Kias, you got the Hondas. All of these people and all these corporations that are selling these different entities have the ability now to aggregate this load and turn around and say, hey, now once we get to this certain saturation level of vehicles out there, when they're all plugged in at nighttime, I may have many, many megawatts or gigawatts of power that I want to sell. Right? Most people, what is the industry standard? You drive 10 or 12 miles maximum to your work and back. So you're going to have a battery that's mostly charged all the time at nighttime when you come home. And so they're going to be looking to become power players and power sellers and power brokers in the next so many years. And that's going to lead to changing how we play at the distribution side of the electric grid.
Yes, but when Elon Musk came to Austin, the first thing he did was to file for the paperwork to make him a provider of electricity.
Yep.
That's the first thing they did. So he's not really in the car business. He's in the electric business.
He wants to be an Tesla electric company.
That's right. He wants to be Tesla electric company and not just in the car business.
When they figure out the next step, when they get past lithium batteries to the next whatever evolution it is, that's a little stronger, holds more, and a little cheaper, it's going to take off.
So where do you see, let's bring business enterprise. You made an interesting statement. You said that the Southeast, the more the electricity, the more they can advertise for business enterprise and et cetera. So as the electricity become problematic in different regions of the country, such as the Rust Belt, then it's less likely they can reinvent themselves through economic kinds of things because they cannot bring the companies there because of the lack of electricity. Is that what you're saying?
In a sense, yeah. So what we've done in the Midwest, where I'm based, is we've done it through tax abatements and then showing how stable the power is. Not so much of the supply amount, but by lowering rates, lowering taxes through economic development, 10-year abatements to try to compete with the Tennessees, the Georgias, the South Carolinas of the world here in the Midwest, by offering those abatements and then using Tantalus technology at our customers, we can come in and tell economic development committees throughout the country how often the power is interrupted. And so that's super important in the standpoint of if the power is interrupted too much, you can't have a production line because you end up having to throw out the product or send the people home or melt the product back down. And if you have too many of those interruptions, they're not going to come and locate in your territory.
Yeah, one of the things that you've talked about, you made the assumption that people would go from work to home. Well, with the distributed workforce, you could be anywhere. I could be in Michigan running my company in Texas. Yep. And as the more we stay home, then the more it switches the load requirements for residential versus, if you will, the workplace.
Yes.
So how do you model the whole idea if we were to do a projection to say that, hey, in the next 40 years, most Americans might be in their home working. So that means then that how we think about the workplace and how we think about where people are, what that means for the home during the day that used to be just flat is now, nothing but energy, seeking electricity. How do you model that kind of activity, if you will, the changes in the demographic workplace and the impact on the grid?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you nailed a great last 5 years with COVID and the things that have occurred. Think about it this way. When I started in the utility industry, our accounting group used to say for every new connect that was going to be added to the system, it equaled X amount of load. But what they didn't factor in over the last 20 years was houses have become so energy efficient and so much better at being built and airtight. It's now 3 or 4 homes equals 1 home from back in the day. So we're not seeing at the distribution level, when they add several hundred homes, it's not like it used to be because they're so doggone energy efficient. We're not getting that ramp up in the electric usage like we used to. And so an air conditioner compressor only runs a fraction of the time like it used to. So even through COVID, it was a nice stable line through a lot of our distribution companies that we serve at Tantalus, where the load wasn't a dramatic growth working from home because your laptop's so efficient, the lighting is so efficient. Once your house is warm, it stays warm most of the day in most places, or cool in most places. So we didn't have that residential load growth like we thought we would during COVID, which was kind of an interesting fact that a lot of people had overlooked through energy efficiency. And I think that's why you see a lot of state legislators and different programs put out so much money toward the energy efficiency to reduce the use of electricity. You get such a return on the investment. It's really amazing doing it that way versus trying to plan for the different growth of energy production.
Let's go to Llewellyn.
Well, there are two things that stand out to me. The first of all is we need a coherent, at least a drive towards coherent federal legislation. And John Wellinghoff, who I had on a USEA program, we all know who John is a very strong advocate for some legislation to give some coherence before we get a lot of contradictory local legislation and exacerbate the problem rather than helping it. So I'm listening and not yet hearing how the utility industry, all 3,000 plus utilities, are going to get together and say what could be done at the federal level to help them all without asking for money, simply asking for coherence in the legislation. And that's one thing. And the other thing is you're not going to get all these people with their cars feeding back into the system unless you can offer them a palpable financial reward. And nobody has told me how that rate structure will work. Designing the structure, the rate structure for accommodating that load and making it attractive. People won't do it. People don't love their utilities. You made the point about how California made an effort and avoided brownouts and blackouts by voluntary, but that was a one-time thing. You know, it's the equivalent of donor fatigue. After 3 times you ask people to turn off, they're going to say to the hell with it. I never liked the utility company anyway. So you've got a lot of fissures here that you've got to get over.
So let me answer some of that, Llewellyn. So the challenge is for the audience. The challenge is that the United States of America as an energy country does not exist. There are 50 states. The states have an incredible amount of power on what happens in their state. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is the only entity that controls intra-state commerce of energy, which falls into the investor-owned utilities that provide such a service, meaning they have wires that cross states, and hence why they're regulated by FERC. ERCOT, Texas, happens also as a state not to be part of that. And then you have investor-owned utilities that are controlled by FERC. You have municipalities that are about 2,000 of them. There are monopolies controlled by cities. And then you have co-ops, which are in charge of rural America, about 900 of them. They are not controlled by FERC. So the Department of Energy, for example, has nothing to do with how energy is regulated in energy. They are in the side of R&D. They're in the side of running labs.
Yeah, Johnny. This is all true, Andre. I know this, but it doesn't answer the fact that if you're facing a national problem, you need a national solution. You can't say because historically it's been splintered, it must be splintered for all time. And by the way, there are federal laws which affect all utilities, particularly to do with clean air and clean water. The National Environmental Policy Act, which came out more than 50 years ago, is one such law. Utilities often are handled as a federal entity, not just by FERC, but by other entities of the federal government, including the large role played in some utility life.
Yeah, but again, for the audience sake, Llewellyn, all those laws that you're talking about had to do with the creation of the electrons and the pollution. co-ops and munis don't have any creation of
Yeah,
electrons. They
we're
may
simply
own.
we're distribution. We take that power that's been generated, and where we're really struggling in this industry, Llewellyn, with the load shifting and the load control is power contracts are 25, 30, 40, 50-year contracts. We just had a customer sign a 50-year power contract with the entity that makes the electricity. It doesn't matter to many of our 300 current customers or the 3,000 utilities that are out there that move power around. If they're bound by a 20, 30, 40-year contract, that G&T or that maker of the electricity is going to recoup their costs no matter what. And so whether that's by me moving load around to save money here, then I have to raise rates over here to meet that gap. And so until that model gets changed a little bit, power is bid on the open market. And these rates and contracts are set well above, these 900 co-ops and municipalities.
Yeah, I would point out there are G&Ts in the co-op business.
There are.
I mean, I know at least 4 of them.
Some of them are owned by the co-ops, but again, the point of the matter is that they have a wall of garden between them and FERC and between them and DOE. So again, you don't have a United States of America. You have 50 states and 3 ownership models of electricity. And now, thanks to John Wellinghoff with FERC 2222, a 4th model has been created. And Google and Microsoft and Amazon and Tesla could become an aggregator of distributed energy resources on the edge of the grid and become a utility overnight.
Let me just
but John Wellinghoff is the man who is asking for preemptive federal legislation. I just point that out. I'm not asking for it. I say John Wellinghoff is asking for it, or he did the last time I spoke to him, which was under a week ago.
Well, let me defend my distinguished colleague from the Northeast. I think what he's saying is, if it goes out, it's all moot. It doesn't matter. So where's the national leadership that would say the country needs to do X, Y, and Z? I think that's what Llewellyn is saying. So
yeah, and besides which, energy is a national security issue, and electricity is becoming more of an national security issue as we electrify more things.
If I could jump on that point, Llewellyn, you're absolutely right. A lot of the utilities out there in our world today in 2023 don't have to turn in their scores or their interruptions or their outage minutes. They're not required to. So a first step in determining the health of our grid across the United States is make all utilities turn that in and hold them accountable and make them to the point where they have to meet certain metrics to keep our country safe and to keep the power on and to keep the lights on. Would be, one of the first steps is to make people report and be held accountable. Right now, we have many, many, many divisions across this country that no one knows how their grid is behaving except those in the local area.
So let me ask you this. Usually if Puerto Rico goes down or California goes down, then there is a cross-fertilization for the utilization to help California out. That is to send stuff out there and to help Louisiana out and et cetera. So I think what Llewellyn is asking is, as we move forward, should this model change? Look, there was one time when every computer was individual, right? Somebody worked on this, and all of a sudden we've got a Microsoft Office. All of a sudden we're working on the same spreadsheet. So my question is, going forward, is there a need for policy to change how the states do business now independently? Do we need an overall commission on helping out when things go bad with the electric grid, or do we have it in place now?
I would let me save Andrew from getting into that. Look, guys. No, because honestly, he sells technology to enable any business model possible. And so what we're witnessing is a decentralization, digitalization, decarbonization push. And their technology enables the distributed reality of that, right? So sort of like, like PCs dominate and the internet architecture is built on a PC architecture, the one versus the mainframe architecture. The same thing is what Tantalus is enabling with their new technology, the new products. They're allowing the co-op and the muni to get into the distributed energy resource management business by basically Uberizing the ownership of assets that generate energy that they don't own, but they can help balance the grid kind of concept.
Okay. So what you're saying is, Andreas, we do not need a change in policy going forward, given the fact if we unify the grid, then the states would cooperate about whether it's the southeast or the northwest. We're all set there. We don't need to change anything, right?
Well, I think that you got FERC 745, you got FERC 860, 861, 1000 and 2222 that lay the groundwork for all these new business models of aggregation of energy storage, of batteries, of demand response on steroids, of virtual power plants. And what's missing is the technology to enable all that, to instrument all that. And so Andrew now to chime in and say, what are they planning on how they instrument all that going forward beyond their current smart meter, and what else are they offering to the marketplace?
Okay.
Yep, very well put.
So Andrew, you want to talk a little bit about TrueSense and maybe connect IQ a little bit?
Dovetailing on what Andreas just said is essentially the goal at Tantalus is to help those utilities be ready for the different steps that are coming along that path, from whether they're completely early 80s technology, mid 90s technology, 2020 technology. We want to leapfrog them to 2023 and beyond. With one, we have a new device, our TrueSense Gateway. There's a big push to run fiber across the country like there used to be electricity back 100 years ago. So this device connects to fiber and allows for real-time connection all the way to the home and beyond the meters, what we call it. So now you can monitor these assets in real time. You can have a finger on the pulse, situational awareness. You can have control, and whatever's called upon from whatever the entity above the distribution level, we are now ready using that technology with our CIQ software, which our CIQ, we have an entire smorgasbord of choices that allow you to have an islanded grid, or to control the grid, or to harmonize the grid, or to feed this data to the entire G&T, or to feed it to the West Coast, or feed it in real time to a federal government database if there ever happened to be one. We have that technology in place now to be able to have that digitization ready to make those choices right now on the spot, automated without pressing the button, to help those utilities meet whatever need they have going forward.
Mm.
Well, very interesting. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hold
Go
on,
ahead, Llewellyn.
Llewellyn.
No, I was wondering, how do you get your revenue? How is Tantalus financed? Is it a percentage? Is it like a percentage on kilowatts, or how do you do it?
Llewellyn, I'm sorry, you cut out at the beginning of your question.
Oh, how is Tantalus do its billing? At what point in the cycle are you paid? Are you paid on a results based on kilowatts delivered or kilowatts saved? What is the basis on which you operate?
We do it on a subscription model. So if I go into a green field, if you will, where there's nothing, we sell it to a utility, and we can sell it to them over a 4-year period and help the utility get to the point where they can manage it themselves on a annual license fee. And there's no commission on our side or no extras for the amount of load. It's just a license-based software. We're a partner with our co-ops and our munis. Our mission is to walk hand in hand with them and to be their partner. We've never had to do what they call a rip and replace with our technology in the last 15, 16, 17 years. So we like to partner with the co-ops. We like to sell it as a subscription model, and then just an annual license, and then we help those customers and those utilities on a year-by-year basis. Some can get very creative. Some can shed millions of dollars in load, and some shed hundreds of dollars in load. And to Tantalus, it's no difference. We just put the technology in place to allow them to meet their goal.
Very, very interesting, because what we have is a grid that's 100 years old, as you've described, a grid that hadn't changed in 100 years, as you've described, a grid that is not exactly digitized, as you described, some part of it. So moving forward, we're moving forward with new technology, a 100-year-old machine, and the question is, how do we continue to upgrade it through new technologies without destroying the entire beast? Is that a good summary?
That's
Okay.
It's a wild, wild west, to be quite honest with you out there, and a lot of people are working on a lot of solutions. Ours is we've chosen, kind of like you guys or Andreas did back in the day. We put a Linux computer in every meter and every module, and we're using that computer platform to help us be able to make those decisions right at the edge of the grid and do different things. And if we need to change it, we simply do like your iPhone or your Android, and we send new firmware to it, and we try to pivot and meet the need of the industry as fast as we can.
I think Andrea should get a hit on every click. Every click should be worth. Every click should be worth $10.
A penny for every
A
click.
penny,
Huh?
a penny.
A penny.
There we go. Yeah. Well,
That's a lot of clicks.
Yeah, I mean, I think well, somebody does have the patent for clicks on computers, so he get paid a lot. So,
Yeah.
but I find it very, very interesting looking at different enterprises, as I do, when there's no competition, how long things can last when there's no competition, how it's so hard to get improvements. So the lesson is have competition for business enterprises to move forward. This lesson is let us make sure that the lights are coming on. So when Llewellyn turns his lights on in the Northeast up there, he'll have lights. That's the only thing Llewellyn is concerned about. So he can pen, if you will, his many outstanding editorials that he tends to write.
Well, and also to be able to put that bow tie on just perfectly for his next appearance.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I cannot tell you how I am upset that he does not have his bow tie on there. I'm going to find my therapist behind this.
Across the country, women are weeping, men are gnashing their teeth. It is a terrible thing I have done.
Well, in looking at the clock, I want to be responsible and say thank you to Andrew for hanging out with us and
Enjoyed
sharing
it.
all this.
Thanks for having me.
Tantalus is doing. Gentlemen, final thoughts.
I think it's an interesting problem.
My final thought is that we do need federal legislation. There are lots of examples where the federal government mandates what utilities do, including pollution controls of all kinds, safety. The federal government has a huge hand in cybersecurity, which affects every utility in the country. And it seems to me totally reasonable that we can have a coherent national energy policy for utilities when it comes to meeting this huge future load, which is a paper that Tantalus itself put out, says is coming and doubling by 2050, and you aren't going to do it by simply moving the chairs on the deck. It isn't going to work that way, although we may between now and 2035 have to move a lot of chairs on the deck. But I thank Andrew so much for his time and for putting up with Johnny.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
You bet you. Ronald Reagan said that the words that you fear most is the government wants to help. But in this case, maybe we have to kind of alter what Ronald Reagan said. But I think it's a very, very interesting business model, and good luck in the future, and keep the lights on. Yeah.
All right. And Johnny,
Thanks,
take
guys.
us away.
Yeah. Well, I never met a girl who makes me feel the way that you do. It's all right. Whenever they ask who make me feel nice, I say that you do. It's out of sight. So 3, 5, 4, 4. Look out, baby, 'cause here I come. And I'm bringing you a love that's true. So get ready. So get ready. I'm gonna try to make you love me too. So get ready. So get ready, 'cause here I come.
Woo! All right.
I'm a
Thank
little
you,
Motown
Andrew,
there.
again. Thank you very much.
Thanks
Yeah,
for having me,
thank you very
guys.
much.
Look forward to seeing you soon.
You
Take
bet.
care.
Take care.
Cheers.
Yep.
Good
Bye-bye.
night. Goodbye.
Hook 'em.